Okay, it's my pleasure to welcome you to Northern Kentucky History Hour. I am your host for tonight, Mary Jane Calderon, joining you from Behringer-Crawford Museum. Also joining me is the Rosemoor Media team, which I will introduce individually shortly, and my assistant for this evening, BCM Visitor Services Associate Heather Cook. Thank you all for being here. Northern Kentucky History Hour is a project of Behringer-Crawford Museum, Northern Kentucky's history museum, that would not be possible without support. Thank you to all of our sponsors, including the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, ArtsWave, Kentucky Arts Council, Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, and our members. If you are not yet a member of the museum, please consider joining for access to discounts and exclusive programming. Learn more and join at bcmuseum.org. We would love to hear from our viewers tonight, so if you have a question or comment to share, please type it in the chat or the Q&A feature, and I will be sure to get to those at the end of the presentation. Now let's meet tonight's presenters. We will start with Haley Snowden. Haley has produced and directed 2 award-winning documentaries, Behind the Uniform, A Look Inside the Cincinnati Fire Department, and Behind the Uniform, A New Class. She's created social media content and worked with small businesses around Cincinnati. She owns Rosemoor Media, LLC, which has produced multiple works across different genres, including an award-winning animated comedy. Welcome, Haley. Next, we have Eileen Heekin. Eileen is a graduate of the Public History program at NKU and is working on this documentary as a continuation of her capstone. She currently works at NKU as an academic coordinator in the College of Health and Human Services. Eileen has researched the Newport Barracks throughout her time in the Public History program and plans to continue her research to assist with completing this documentary. Next, we have Michael Coker. Michael has decades of experience working with historic sites, museums, and archives. He currently teaches U.S. history at Mount St. Joseph and Gateway College. He is the author of The Battle of Port Royal, Charleston Curiosities, and South Carolina, an Illustrated History, and numerous historical articles and essays. Most recently, he served as a co-author on the paper Archaeological Identification of the Newport Barracks Site. Welcome, Michael. And last but not least, but actually we do have Dr. Hackett here. If you can see here, we have Professor Hackett. I do want to mention that he is here, and today is his birthday, so big shout out to him on his birthday. Happy birthday, Dr. Hackett.
Happy birthday.
So now, last but not least, virtually, we have with us Ethan Powles joining us by Zoom. Ethan is a graduate of NKU's Masters of Public History program. He currently volunteers at the Heritage Village Museum, where he created videos for their self-guided tour and participated in educational events. For 7 years, Ethan has been a part of the living history community, participating in reenactment events covering time periods from the late 1770s to the early 1900s. He brings his knowledge of video production and connections with 1812 reenactors to this project. Thank you all so much for being here. Okay, so now before we get started, there is a quiz question tonight. The first respondent to enter a correct answer in the chat on Zoom or Facebook Live wins a Northern Kentucky History Hour prize, and most importantly, bragging rights. Tonight's question is, what was the Newport Barracks mascot during the War of 1812? So please leave those answers in the chat, and I am going to go ahead and turn it over to all of you if we want to stop sharing our screen there for a second.
Hi, so I'm Haley Snowden. We are my lovely team. We're working on the Newport Barracks documentary. To get started, so just a little bit more about me. These are some of the projects that I've done. I've done 2 full-length documentaries with the Cincinnati Fire Department. Just a great crew right there. And yeah, I kind of got involved through Mike, who I've known for a long time, and that's how I met Dr. Hackett and Eileen, and we kind of started, and Ethan, we just kind of started collaborating and decided that this was something that was really important to kind of highlight this history. And it's something that not a lot of people, know about. At least I didn't until I started diving into it a little bit more. Probably forgetting something. So some of the people we've interviewed, obviously, Dr. Hackett. We've also interviewed Don Miller, who is an archaeologist. They actually did a dig last year at the site, which I was there for, which was really interesting. And they found a lot of things that were, 800, 1,000 years old, I believe. So that was really, really great. We've also talked to Steve Preston, who is the executive director of the Heritage Village. Also has a lot of knowledge on the military history of the barracks. Dr. David Childs, who is professor at NKU as well, focused on.
I was going to say, Pat, if you're watching, the misspelling is my mistake. I put Pat Coggins. So the blame is on me for my bad typing. It should be Pat Coggins is the next person up, Mr. Pat Coggins.
Yeah. So, and we've talked a little bit about the Underground Railroad and like how the Newport Barracks had their involvement with it. Patrick Coggins, Soldier Life, and Laura Suppinger. She talked a lot about women's history with us, which was really interesting, and just kind of the lives of the wives of officers and just kind of like socially and economically their impact during the time. Here you go. Ethan.
All right. So, hi, everybody. I'm Ethan. Sorry, I couldn't be there in person with everybody else. So kind of the big things that I was for this project was I'll be the guy who's the editor putting it all together. You'll get to see some of that work later on. And then I was also kind of the reenactment coordinator, just kind of a little bit about myself, like you heard earlier. I've been doing living history stuff for 7 years now, so I've made some friends over the time. And really, I think just kind of the living history is one of the kind of important ways to get history out there. It's sort of a novel way to experience history. It's why I kind of like it of, you're kind of living as close as approximation as you can to how they would have been, a soldier back in the War of 1812 or the Mexican-American War, what have you. And, so it offers something more than what just reading or looking at artifacts can give you. And as far as the documentary, the reenactors were a great help with it. I mean, we have some scenes that we're able to recreate with them that, there wouldn't maybe be paintings or wood cuttings that would exist of it, but instead of just, having a talking head, we can kind of show what it would have looked like. And it just kind of adds, a nice production value to the whole documentary because, I mean, these guys eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. So, a lot of their gear is all very authentic or as close as you can in modern times. And it just, it adds a nice air of, I guess, prestige to the documentary, as it were. You guys want me to talk a little bit about Fort Wayne or?
You could say what they're seeing on screen there.
You got to speak up, Mike. What was that?
Yeah, you can talk about old Fort Wayne there.
Yeah. So luckily, one of our big filming places is we actually went out to Fort Wayne, Indiana, to the old fort there because they actually have a War of 1812 garrison event. So you may not realize it, but there are a lot of War of 1812 reenactors out there. I know this part of the country, there's a lot of Civil War, but there's War of 1812 too. And so it was a very cold weekend, but we got a lot of good footage and really great people. I mean, there's probably 20 or so people there that we all worked with and got some really good stuff. And like I said, good people. Saw a lot of familiar faces I'd met at other events. So it's good getting to catch up with everybody. Beautiful fort.
Cool. And then Soldier's Life.
Yeah. I mean, you'll see a little bit more about, I guess, where the prisoner of war life. We have a clip from that for Pat and Dr. Hackett talking on it. I mean, a soldier's life, it's kind of a little bit of what you would think. You're living in a fort. You're constantly, drilling. One of the fun things we kind of learned about while we were there is they would give out their what they call their bourbon ration. And basically how they did that is the commanding officer would have a big bucket with a ladle and you'd have to, you put it in your cup and you have to drink it in front of him because if he didn't want you to, stick it in your cheek and then spit it out to sell to somebody else later. So you drank it in front of him. We heard two conflicting stories. One said that you then had to open your mouth. Another guy said then the officer would stick a finger in there to make sure that you swallowed it. But, so that was sort of the military discipline and stuff that they were I got exposed to her like during that time period. And I thought that was kind of one of the fun stories.
Well, so we also have our trailer that we'll show you guys real quick, just to kind of give you an idea about where we're at and where we're going with it. So we'll do that real fast. There we go.
Fingers crossed it works.
I think the Newport Barracks is very important because of things that happened there, but what it was a symbol of. Cincinnati area, Northern Kentucky area, this was the place to be after the American Revolution. In the 50 or so years after the Revolution, this was the staging area for what was to become next. And so if you think about everything that happened, all the War of 1812, the Indian Wars, the settlements, all that kind of stuff, it's because of what was going on here. And that can't be underestimated in its importance.
Every major event that happened in an old Northwest Territory, again the Midwest, during the War of 1812 stemmed from the Newport Barracks. The Newport Barracks was a vital, very important logistical supply center for that part of the region of the country during the War of 1812.
The Newport Barracks in Kentucky is significant for history. One of the things I always talk about is history is not set in stone. What we know changes. Our knowledge, our level of knowledge and understanding what happened, particularly during the War of 1812, and looking at it during the Civil War time and throughout the whole 1800s, what we understand changes. And it's important because it uncovers history we did not know, like we talked about, the role that it might have played during enslavement, the role that a place right there on the contested boundaries of Ohio and Kentucky could play during the Civil War.
After the War of 1812 and the Civil War, the barracks largely becomes sort of like a supply depot of men and materials and planning for things that were happening out in the West. So it has a vital role in deciding what the world is going to be, what America is to become. And that's really important because, of course, we wouldn't be the nation we were or are without the influence of the barracks.
So that's a little bit of what we got going on so far. That is not, and I think, no. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so I think this is you, Mike.
Okay. Mary Jane, would you be able to move the screen, the thing over a little? Yeah. Thank you. Hey everybody, so I'm Mike Coker. Barracks has been a part of my life pretty heavily for the last couple of years. Ethan, Eileen, and I all went to Northern Kentucky University, and oh, sorry, you're telling me to speak up. Sorry, so I'll speak up. If you can't hear me, put something in chat or send me a frowny emoji, and I'll get louder. But we all have spent some time in grad school studying the barracks, and we were so interested in it that we kept studying it and roped Haley into it. And Dr. Hackett serves as our historical advisor on this film. But the area of land is and was important for European colonists showed up. The Licking in Ohio were part of a great trade network. That's one of the things we're going to talk about in the documentary is its use pre-contact. And what I'd like to do, fingers crossed, is I'm going to show you a short snippet with an interview we did with the archaeologist Don Miller. Don was a professor at NKU, has been teaching doing archaeology for 20, 30 years, something like that. And his specialty is Native American history. Don was kind of running point when they did the work at the barracks just last year. And we're out there doing GPR and sifting through some of the soil. And so we got a short snippet here to see if Don here can tell you a little bit more about that prehistory.
We know that these people living here were horticulturalists. They lived in villages. They grew corn, beans, squash, hunted deer, and certainly were involved in international trade markets before they actually saw Euro-Americans. The sale of deer pelts and hides was very important to the world economy before beaver, before other furs. So we do know that these people were living a cyclical lifestyle, focusing on the village, but moving about further than previous, looking for deer and taking deer, processing the hides, and then shipping those off.
All right, so that's just sort of a snippet from Don. We do have a much longer video that we plan to incorporate in the documentary. But getting into post contact in colonial America, excuse me, I want to turn over to Dr. Hackett. If you would talk a little bit about the early colonial period, Camp Washington, and then how Mr. James Taylor gets involved with this.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting to note, and it's very important to remember that the real prize during the American Revolution was land west of the Alleghenies. And so what happens is that America realizes how important it is, and they came up with the Northwest Ordinance. Northwest Ordinance of 1787 is the framework for the U.S. Constitution. And it was because of what was happening here. So it becomes important for us to hold on to this territory. So in 1787, after the American Revolution, they built a fort. And it's Fort Washington. It's in Cincinnati. It's just on the other side of the river. And it's there to keep our hold on the place. Unfortunately, the British weren't so eager to let it go. And this is why we had a War of 1812. But from about 1787 to about 1803, Fort Washington was there. And then they decided that Fort Washington wasn't as needed. It had become sort of out of date. And so they needed to create a new space. And that new space, of course, becomes the fort in Newport. And person kind of behind pushing that was James Taylor. James Taylor was the largest landowner in northern Kentucky. He was a Revolutionary War veteran. He had a lot of clout, both politically and financially. And so he actually said, this is where the fort needs to be, right at the corner of where the Ohio meets the Licking River, which is great because when you think about transportation, that's the only transportation there is. And so it's in a key, vital place. And of course, being the entrepreneur that he is, not only did he provide the land, but he also supplied the supplies in order to build it, which is very interesting because we have some interesting theories about this as we've been doing research. One of the things that was added early on at the fort is a powder magazine. And we are suspicious that this powder magazine may have been adapted from a design from Benjamin Latrobe, who was actually designed the White House and much of what we know of in history as one of America's greatest early architects.
And so the design of the powder magazine, very unusual.
Yeah, it's very unusual because what it was designed as, it's circular, so that if it were to explode, it doesn't hit one point and be forceful. It spreads out the explosion. Also, it's sunk into the ground so that the explosive materials are actually below grade to prevent great destruction. Also, the roof is meant to be blown off. So it blows up rather than out, which in turn would save lives. And it's very, very similar to a design that Benjamin Latrobe came up with in 1806. So the barracks in Newport started in 1803 and then grew into what it eventually became. And it was pretty important and pretty amazing.
They call it a beehive design?
Yes, it's a beehive design. The only difference that we can see between the one that we had and the one that Benjamin Latrobe had built for another U.S. fort is that there was the entrance was different. But other than that, it's pretty much the same design.
So tell us what happens next about those famous guys hired by Jefferson to go out west.
Oh, you mean the Lewis and Clark?
Yeah.
Well, of course, it's really interesting because there's now a Lewis and Clark organization that is trying to commemorate the Lewis and Clark visit and how important it was, because it's just interesting to read about Lewis and Clark going out west because it's a diplomatic vision more than anything else. They were exploring, and there had been people out there exploring before, But this was, hey, we just got this land through the Louisiana Purchase. Let's see what's there. And they go out and they ended up actually doing a lot of trading with Native Americans and setting up some actually good relations with Native Americans, largely because of Sacagawea and the African American whose name jumps out of my head right now, York, who was actually saved them on a number of occasions because the Native Americans had never seen a black man before, and they thought that he was some sort of god. And so anyway, so it becomes important, and they staged it here. So the question became, and the question that people were trying to answer, did Lewis and Clark stop at the fort when they came through? And it's kind of, we kind of think it might be a ridiculous question, because we know that they stopped at James Taylor's house. James Taylor's house was right next to the fort. I mean, literally, you look out the window and there's the fort. So it's hard to imagine that they didn't visit the fort and when they were at James Taylor's house, because it'd be like looking out into their backyard. So it's kind of interesting. It also is a statement to how important this area was, not only for Western expansion, but also scientific discovery, because the ground sloth that's in Monticello at Thomas Jefferson's home was actually taken from Big Bone Lick. And that was a big deal.
Yeah. So did I hear it correctly that it's now going to be added as part of the Lewis and Clark Trail?
Yes,
Yeah.
It is going to be added part of the Lewis and Clark Trail, as is Big Bone Lick.
Cool. Thank you, Dr. Hackett. All right, I think we are going to switch gears here just a minute. Let's see. I can like technology cooperate with me. Flip to the next slide.
Yeah, just there we go.
There we are. So this is Eileen and her area of expertise.
So my niche is, for at least this kind of research, is the War of 1812. Before the Battle of the Thames, which I'll get into in a minute, the barracks was kind of used as like a training space for William Henry Harrison's troops, because he was the governor of the Indiana Territory at the time. And this is prior to when he was our shortest term president in 1841. So the Battle of the Thames, it was obviously the British and the Native American Confederacy, which was led by Tecumseh, versus the Americans led by William Henry Harrison. The Kentucky regiment that came from the barracks was under the command of Colonel Richard Johnson and was instrumental in the American victory at this battle. Though its evidence is unclear, Johnson is credited with the death of Tecumseh. There are many other stories that say that somebody else killed Tecumseh, but that is just what we have here. The British retreat and the death of Tecumseh led to the victory on the American side, and led to over 400 British POWs to be marched back to the barracks, which at the time was a larger population than Newport. And so I found a roster of the prisoners from the British archives, and there are some notable prisoners at the barracks. There was one, the youngest prisoner that I found was a 10-year-old drummer and a attempted escapee killed on Christmas Eve, 1813. His name was Patrick Kelly. He was an Irish subaltern who, according to the roster, was shot by a sentinel trying to force the guard on December 24th, 1813. I've been trying to find more information about Patrick Kelly. The records, we don't know his age or much about him. We know he's from Ireland. So it's been kind of difficult to pinpoint which Patrick Kelly is the one that we know was killed at the barracks. Because Patrick Kelly is kind of a generic name for an Irishman. So it's been kind of difficult, especially when we don't have an age range to narrow it down. So on the screen, there is a engraving of the Battle of the Thames, and Patrick Milton was one of the reenactors at the Old Fort in Fort Wayne, and he played our Patrick Kelly for our reenactment. So I think that's...
Oh, you went too far.
My bad.
No, you're okay.
give people something to look forward to.
Yeah,
Right.
building anticipation.
Oh, these are just some photos that we took from the when we went up to Old Fort Wayne. As you can see, very cold. But it was a really fun day and everyone was super great and very helpful. All of them knew their stuff, so that was really cool.
For your main event.
My main event. This is one thing that has really just kept me in with this is the battle pig. So basically when they were marching up to the Battle of the Thames, they found this pig on their way up and it decided to follow them all the way up to Canada. And they didn't think it was going to continue following them this entire time. Followed them all the way up to Canada, followed them all the way back to Newport. And they basically just adopted this pig. And it was General Shelby.
Mhm.
General Shelby adopted the pig and it lived out the rest of its life on his farm.
Was he Governor Shelby at that
It was
time?
Governor Shelby.
Governor Shelby, sorry.
No, I think he did have a rank in the
Yeah.
military.
Okay.
Right, he did.
Yeah.
He became governor.
Yeah.
I'm the film geek, so I'm doing my best in this. But I just thought this was just a fantastic story, and we definitely talk a lot about it, and just kind of how, yeah, I just love the battle pigs.
It's interesting because he actually, we think it was a female pig, they saw it fighting off another pig and they rooted for it. And when it won, they threw it some scraps and it adopted them and hung out. And actually it was before they left, and they were going to leave it behind at the fort, but it swam the Ohio River to be with them. So this is, Battle Pig was quite the warrior.
Yeah, so that's an artistic representation.
Yeah.
We don't know the
It's
actual
not-
armor,
it's not-
knight's armor.
It's not historically accurate.
But
no.
We
apparently
wish it was.
Yeah.
Yes.
the soldiers would cheer when the pig finally made its arrival in the camp after lagging behind the marching. So we'll definitely talk about that kind of fun story. And that's, did you guys, any of you get a trivia winner?
Oh, yes. Well,
Yeah.
we can go ahead and do the trivia
Yeah.
winner if you'd like.
Who guessed the right mascot? Yeah.
So once again, let's
Yeah.
get that question again. It was, what was the Newport Barracks mascot during the War of 1812? And Heather, who did we get any correct answers on that one?
Yes, Scott Clark. Pretty much as soon as it was asked.
Congratulations.
Hey, way to go, Scott.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
We love it.
Yeah.
We love it. All right, what?
And then
Oh yeah, this is the so this is a little bit more about Patrick Kelly. So we did a little bit of kind of a reenactment just to kind of show more of what actually happened and how they think it went down.
A large part of the unit the British military that was taking part in the battle, 41st Foot Infantry Regiment, a large number of them were captured. A large number, somewhere around 800 men were probably captured. The charge happened so fast that they had no shot at putting up a resistance. So after the Battle of the Thames, the 41st Foot POWs were marched back to down Ohio and were housed at the Newport Barracks.
In those days, they held their prisoners a little bit differently than we would. The prisoners could be furloughed as long as they stayed within the boundaries of the city of Newport. That means not only could they go into town, drink at the restaurant, go to the restaurants, drink at the bars, that kind of stuff, but they could also get jobs. And so a number of them got jobs. In fact, we have a house in town known as the Campbell House, and portions of the Campbell House were actually built by War of 1812 soldiers.
We know that in one famous instance there was a British POW by the name of Patrick Kelly. He was a British subaltern who, on the eve of Christmas 1813, tried to escape. He was shot dead.
They said he died forcing the guard. We're not quite sure what that means. And he was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere within the fort. And so that's something we want to pursue. As you know, one of our greatest allies in American history has been the British. And I think we would love to see him honored, or at least the memory of the relationship that we've had with the British somehow honored at the fort.
A large part of the unit that the British
All right.
Right. Flip it back this way. Yeah, so after the War of 1812, the barracks continued to have a very high importance for the American military. It was continuing to be used as a depot supply station. And it's probably the biggest claim, and one of the things we're really excited to talk about, and I think I'm going to zoom it back to Haley for just a sec. One of the things Haley was really interested in was Dr. Hackett's theory. Dr. Hackett has a pretty remarkable theory about the Newport Barracks and westward expansion.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because we know that there were 5 generals who served in the Civil War actually were at the base at one time. And we think that this became a planning area for what was going to happen when we moved west of the Mississippi. We were the gateway. And after the War of 1812, and we get into the Mexican War and the Civil War, the outcome of the Civil War was never really doubt. The Northern had such overpowered numbers and supplies and everything. They were beginning to look at the West. And in 1862, they passed the Homestead Act, which actually allowed people going west to claim 160 acres if they were able to improve the land. But that land had to be, there were people on it. It was already there. And a lot of Native American tribes would migrate through the plains and through the West and following herds of buffalo and, planting crops and so on. So those things had to be dealt with, rightly or wrongly, it had to be dealt with. And so there became major military operations and the building of forts, and all looked back to Newport as the place this planning took place. So it was very important, and still was important throughout to the later part of the 19th century when the floods destroyed the fort.
Yeah. So getting up to the Civil War period, the fort has a lot of value for defense of Cincinnati, northern Kentucky region, but is also used once again as a POW site. Apparently they would have POWs from the Confederate side, would be held there. They had, what I understand, mostly political prisoners held there at the time. There was a hospital on the grounds of the barracks. I understand they did treat wounded soldiers north and south at the barracks in the facilities there. But all those guys from the Civil War were familiar with, like Grant, Sherman. In the Mexican-American War, they were there first. Sherman got into a little bit of trouble by kind of getting on a ship and coming down to the barracks and trying to go to fight. He was found out by a superior officer and basically shipped him back. So Sherman came through there before he rose to fame in the Civil War. Grant would visit the barracks in 1858. I believe Robert E. Lee was there, and he held a court-martial. Robert E. Lee at that time was still part of the U.S. Army, and he presided over a court-martial case that was actually determined there at the barracks. And you saw a snippet from Dr. Childs. Dr. Childs is a theology professor at NKU.
I was a historian and English professor. Yes.
And he gave us a great interview, gave us some information about Newport Barracks' role during the time of the Fugitive Slave Act and what would be the reaction of the individuals in the barracks coming across.
I need to correct myself.
Yeah.
He's a historian and education. He's in the education department,
Yeah.
not English. I'm sorry I said that.
Some people were having trouble hearing you a little
Oh,
bit, so
sorry.
I just want to speak up.
All right. So again, I'm going to scoot up a little bit closer. So one of the things we'll cover in the finished documentary is talking about the fugitive slaves, the Underground Railroad connection at the barracks. So getting across the Ohio was getting to freedom, getting to Cincinnati. And so this would be one of the gateway points to freedom for a lot of individuals, a lot of enslaved seeking, opportunity in the North. We don't have anything definitive saying that the Black Brigade of Cincinnati was there, but again, like James Taylor in the fort, odds are very high that they had something to do or were in that fortification or around the barracks at some point of time.
I think it's pretty safe to assume. There was a rule that if you were traveling up the Ohio River on a steamboat and you had enslaved people working on the steamboat, you stopped at Louisville and dropped off your
enslaved people, and they held them there until you were able to conduct your business in Cincinnati and come back. Because once you got to Cincinnati, it was so easy to escape as an enslaved person. And we have pretty good evidence that we believe probably the fort was involved, but there were a lot of individuals involved as well. And so that gets exciting when you think about the freedom being an underwriting note for this whole thing. What was freedom, the defense of freedom, and the definition of freedom.
Move to the next slide here. All right, it's beeping at me, Haley.
You just gotta.
There we go.
There you go.
Can you scoot that over for me? Thank you.
Yep.
So one of the things we also talk about is the Newport Band. The Newport Barracks Band was famous. If you were anybody of notoriety, you were a politician, you were a wealthy businessman, you were a community leader of some form, they would often have the band there to function. If you passed away and you were somebody who met that criteria, they would have the Newport Barracks Band there. I found in I believe it was the Maryland Historical Society, there was a letter, I think it's mid to late 1800s, where there is a gentleman who's at the barracks, describes some of the buildings, which we're really grateful for, but also talks about seeing all the ships out on the Ohio. The ships are anchored out there, listening to the barracks band play. There's simply people would, cluster around to hear the barracks band play. This was one of two schools of music during the American Civil War, where they actually formally taught musicians. Musicians in the Civil War battlefield are really important because not having telephones, walkie-talkies, or any kind of quick mass communication, they would often listen to the sound of the drums, sound of the instruments for which way to turn on the battlefield, which flank to go. And so the barracks actually did serve as one of the two schools of music at that time. We also do talk a little bit about the living conditions. Pat Coggins, historian, has done extensive research about the life of the soldiers there. These were people who sacrificed for hardship, for patriotism, and it was not easy being in a place like the barracks, being away from home first time. Dr. Hack has talked about this being the birth of Sin City, Newport, having the base there, or having the barracks there.
Well, when you have a bunch of troops and young men who've been away from home for the first time, they're likely interested in a few things that they can't get at home. Probably alcohol and of course ladies, and of course gambling. So we have a theory that of course it was the barracks that brought Sin City to Newport, and then after the barracks moved out, those organizations, those businesses needed to continue, and that's how we became Sin City. It's very interesting because if you look at the census of the 1870s, the 1870 census, prostitution is legal. And prostitutes are listed in the 1870 census. And you can see where they were, their addresses, how many people were in the house. That rumor has it that at one time, and it still may be true, that anytime there's 5 women living together under the same roof that are not related, that's considered a brothel. And I think that's part of Kentucky law. And that's why a number of colleges do not have sororities houses for that reason.
You got it.
Once again, Haley comes in with the tech support. Okay, so if you'd scoot that over for me just a little bit. Thank you. So you might have noticed on some of the slides we hit acts. We sort of divided the story of the barracks into 5 acts. The longest act will probably be the War of 1812, talking about the POWs, the Battle of the Thames. But we are also going to be talking about the demise of the barracks. You can see one of the photographs here from the late 1880s. I think it was flood 1882, 83, and then 86, 89, somewhere in that neck of the woods. But the Ohio likes to overflow its banks, and the barracks, being right where it is, was prone to these floods. And that's ultimately what's going to close the fort. It's just not tenable with all the flooding. So they're going to close down the barracks, and they are going to set up a new location for the military here in the area, which of course is Fort Thomas. All right, let's see if I can remember it this time without Haley. Yep, there we go. So sometime in the early 20th century, they decided to commemorate the history of the Newport Barracks by putting up on the screen there that first memorial, overlooking. It's a beautiful view looking across the river. You can see the Red Stadium right across the water. And oh, Haley wants to know she took that picture. So there's a good picture. So how are they going to reinterpret this fort? There's been some plans. Understand the city of Newport, which we've got to thank the city of Newport for their support. They've been wonderful for it and been so gracious sharing any information with us. I understand that they did the archaeology out there recently, and there's potential perhaps to rework the fort. Any idea on that, Dr. Hackett?
I know that the city has been working on a number of plans. As you know, they got about an $8 million grant to work on it from the state. I expect that there'll be some announcements and things soon. I'll tell you, the fort's in good hands with Newport. They really understand the history. They really enjoy the history, and they want to celebrate it. So I think that people are going to be excited once some of the ideas come out.
Yeah, when they were out there doing archaeology, so many of the locals came out to see what was going on and find out about it, and they would tell family members about it. People are very proud of the history in their backyard. And so I'll kind of shift back over to Haley here, because talking about plans for the finished film and how you can help.
Yeah, so basically once we get this done, we really want to make sure that it's accessible for people, because personally, I don't feel like I feel like if you're going to put together something that's educational and that has something to do with the community, it should be easily accessible to anyone. And that is our goal. We're not exactly sure how we will make sure that people can see it, but we do want to reach out to different educational groups, maybe more, I don't know, like I have my current ones are on YouTube. So we want to see how else we could reach out and make sure that people can know about the importance of Newport Barracks and the impact it had on westward expansion, and look towards how it is today. So there's a couple of things that we, if you wanted to help, we have a GoFundMe, so we can get more archival photos in. We really want to make sure we show what it was. And my plan is to also take pictures from similar angles, so you can kind of get an idea of what it looks like now compared to what it was then. So we still have a few more things to get done, but we are in a really, really great place. And we have a lot of our video all taken with all the reenactments. You can contact me. You can contact the Newport Barracks Gmail. There's a QR code for a GoFundMe. Yeah, that's just a couple of ways you guys can help out if you're interested.
Can you move that picture so they can use that QR code?
Yeah, it's not showing up.
Oh, okay.
Well, thank you guys so much. Can we get that in the chat too, Heather? Can you put that her email there and everything in the chat, and you can be able to access that. We're going to go ahead and stop sharing our screen now. And Heather, I'm sure we've got some questions and comments that we'd love to hear. Oh, you're still muted, Heather.
Yeah, so the first question was someone was just asking if Eileen was related to Minnie Farwick Heekin, who was born in 1898. He said that his great aunt was her friend.
I don't know, probably. If she was from this area, I would say most definitely, probably. There are a lot of Heekins in this area, so related somehow, probably, yeah.
Interesting.
And then our other question was asking, how do you get permission to dig for artifacts at historic sites?
Okay, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, I can. Generally, it's not available to the public. The archaeology was actually done by the State Office of Archaeology, and our students were there to help. Because this is a state site, any kind of renovation or work that's been done on a historic site that belongs to a municipality that receives state funds, it's required. So that's how you do that. I think that the concern is by the state and other historical organizations that things be cataloged and organized so that we can gain as much information as possible. I know that when the state did the dig at the fort, they made some remarkable discoveries that probably would have been missed by a lot of people. The most amazing thing is that there's evidence of civilization, the people living there before, before the fort was ever there, that it was a Native American settlement, probably 1,000 to 1,500 years ago. So, it's required, the state requires this kind of thing for a lot of municipalities. So that's how it's usually done. And also some universities here within the tri-state do archaeology. So they often get permission as well, but not for individuals.
Thank you, Dr. Hackett. All right, Heather, we got some more questions.
No, those were our only 2 questions, but somebody did just say that the archaeology in municipalities is covered by the Kentucky Antiquities Act of 1963.
Correct.
Thank you, Don.
Is that Don Miller?
Don Miller, yes.
Yeah, it was Don.
And I apologize. Some people said we had some trouble hearing the sound. Sorry, Janine. If anybody has any other questions or comments, please get them in the chat and we'll get to them. Is there anything else that you guys would like to add?
Feel free to contact us with any interest. We do have an Instagram page for the Newport Barracks documentary, and you can reach out through our emails. We'd be happy to answer any questions, collaborate. We're so eager to get some support and get this done and for people to see it and see how important Newport is.
I would say one question we get asked a lot is about, speak up, is about burials at the fort. And we believe actually the burials have probably been moved to Evergreen Cemetery, that there was some point later in was it early 20th century when the walls went in?
Yeah, they moved them in the early 20th century, yes. And actually, when the fort moved, they moved some bodies. And they were moved to, is it Green Lawn Cemetery? Evergreen Cemetery. Evergreen.
Yeah, they were moved first someone moved to where the Peace Belt site is, I think. And then from the Peace Belt site, they were moved to Evergreen. So we've gotten asked that a lot by people wanting to know, was there a soldier cemetery? Most likely they're all at Evergreen Cemetery right now, which is in northern Kentucky.
Right.
Yeah. So, but if there's any other questions, be happy to answer. Yeah.
We got some awesome program. Thank you.
Oh, thank
some
you.
Comments. But you know what I'm kind of interested in? So I studied film and electronic media and broadcasting at NKY. But I was interested in the reenactment stuff. Like, how did you get your reenactors? How did you find these people that you got involved in the film?
That would be Ethan.
That's Ethan.
Yeah.
Really, it's just because I am in the hobby too. I'm one of those nut jobs who dresses up like that on weekends. And so it's just making contacts, going to events, meeting people. Michael Cooper was the guy I knew in 1812. And I emailed him, was like, hey, would you guys want to help us film a documentary? He's like, yes, they'd be very happy to help you film this documentary. Here's some times you can come get with us. So really, yeah, I mean, it's just, getting in good with your local reenactment groups. That's why I say I always like to try to bring the reenactment and living history group together with the professional museum history, because sometimes there's a disconnect. So I like to bridge that gap when I can for stuff like this.
Very cool. I liked what I saw. So that was very in the trailer.
Yeah, no, they're good people.
They're great. They were all very enthusiastic, very helpful. When we brought up, when we were doing the Patrick Kelly reenactment, I mean, even they were like, well, we need to make sure that this is right because we don't want it to be like this. Like, even they were like, we're going to do this. We're going to make it as accurate as we possibly could within our limits, which was great,
Yes, I can say as a reenactor that, we spend a lot of money on the hobby. So when we get a chance to show it off, we jump at it.
I'm wondering why Jason French wasn't reached out to at all, our curator of collections. Yeah.
I got to get in his circle.
Jason's on our list because we would love to film. Jason did a great video on YouTube about the history of the Newport Barracks several years ago, and he has been on our list of people to interview about pick his brain and add him to the documentary as well. So.
Yes, and Jason loves to reenact and dress up.
You're on blast, so now you can't say no.
Yeah. I can't see, but our curator collection, Jason French, just walked in, so he's in here with us, and I don't know if he has a question.
No, you guys did great. You're amazing.
Okay. Well, if that's all, let's see. We got a great topic and a worthwhile endeavor. You need to improve your present. Okay. They couldn't hear the presentation so well, so I apologize, Tom. So I apologize for that. Hopefully, we will have subtitles worked in here when I upload this to YouTube. So, but he said a great topic and a good job.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Tom. Okay, so we want to go ahead and wrap up then. Are you ready, Heather? We're going to go share our screen because we've got a lot of stuff going on here at the museum too that we want to let you guys know about before we leave. But thank you all. Sorry, thank you so much. For more Northern Kentucky history throughout the week, check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel where you can find the latest curators chat along with all of our past Northern Kentucky History Hour presentations. Please like and subscribe. That's all that we have time for this evening. Thank you again to all the sponsors and supporters of BCM. Until next time, take care, everyone, and good night. And thank you to this great crew.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.